Hello everyone, this is Joshua Phillips for Living Reason. Just a reaction video to the nomination acceptance speech that Donald Trump gave. In short, I thought it was pretty terrifying. So my idea for this video is going to be just a quick rundown of my basic thoughts without elaboration, so everyone can sort of get the main idea and think about it on their own if they want to. Then I'm going to loop back around, give a little more depth, a little more substance to what I'm talking about. The idea being the first 5 minutes or so will just be my thoughts in short form that hopefully everyone will be able to digest. Then I might just continue for a little while with further elaborations. So here we go. Hope you enjoy. First, in a word, I think Donald Trump's speech should just be viewed as vacuous, chest-pounding nonsense. Even if you actually agree with many of the general policy concerns he has, the actual particulars are ridiculous or were stated without any substance or concern with making the ideas come about in reality. Secondly, in a philosophical sense, it utterly lacked any attempt to establish that Donald Trump actually has the system of thought in his own mind to be able to deal with problems. At no point did he attempt to lay out a philosophy of human nature or civilization, or even an understanding of how humans gather knowledge and use rationality to learn or improve things or live, etc., etc. So I have a few particular points I want to break that down into. One, this law and order business is mostly a farce. For this reason, you can't just say, we're going to enforce the law. Because first, you have to decide what laws you're stressing. Second, you have to actually decide what sorts of approaches you're going to take to enforcement. Third, you need an actual plan for handling the difficulties that will arise with enforcement. But most importantly, you need a system of thought that addresses what the purpose of law is in civilization. You need an understanding of who the law is supposed to serve and what the law is supposed to serve. But in Donald Trump's acceptance speech, all he did was pound his chest and say, I will stand for law and order and stop the bad guys and stop the crime. But the problem is that in the United States, most of the recent concerns involving the sort of law and order category are about the issues that arise when you have policing in communities where either, in simple terms, where the community and the police do not get along very well. And in particular cases, the exact reasons for this vary. Right? Sometimes it is due to systematic problems in the police force, and that's one of the big things that would have to be addressed to have any sort of successful approach to safety in that community. With terrorism, we need to ask what the actual A, motivations are, because that will frequently be something that needs to be addressed, not just say we're going to be tough on it. B, what actual options do we have for reducing the problem? Because the United States already throws a ton of people in jail proportionally, especially relative to, say, industrialized, vaguely speaking, Western civilizations. So if being tough was the solution, we'd be walking on streets paved with gold, and we'd probably be concerned about why they paved the streets with gold, not why people keep getting shot. So the point I want to make there is that law and order is not a strategy. It is not a philosophy for improving the relationship between communities and the police. It is not a strategy for avoiding the circumstances or the ideological motivations that cause crime. Right? You are not going to stop murder by having Donald Trump say, I will be tough. It is not going to work. The fact that that's all his plan consists of should very much terrify you, because do we know who he's going to target? Right? When someone just says we need to stop criminals, if they don't have a clearly established philosophy of law, do we know who they consider criminals? Right? What's Donald Trump going to focus on? Are we just talking like making sure there's more enforcement of traffic violations? Are we talking vastly expanded surveillance in poor communities? Are we talking sending SWAT teams to catch Grandpa Bill who's growing pot in his backyard? Like, there is nothing in Trump's speech that clarifies whether he's even planning on enforcing laws in a rational way, much less whether the be tough plan is even the way to handle it. Whew. Secondly, and thematically connected on this, if you listen to Trump's speech carefully, it is fundamentally an appeal and an attempt to elicit fear, concern, or anger about the current situation of the United States, suggesting, crimes committed by illegal immigrants, a legitimate concern, but most of Trump's facts are ridiculously hyperbolic. Fear of terrorism, fear of crime, etc., that fuels this tough guy persona he's going for. And the problem with this is that it's okay to be worried about bad things. There are terrorists, there is crime, there are people being shot, there are all these legitimate things that reasonable people ought to be worried about. I agree with that. But the problem is that humans, as we should all have learned, don't do the best job of deciding on policy prescriptions while quaking and panicking. Even for things that are urgent and that matter, we will not get good solutions by panicking and doing whatever sounds like the most quick snap solution to all our problems. And I would ask anyone watching to think, has panicking ever solved a policy problem? Just think about that, right? Has doing the most snap reaction, we're scared, we need to stop the bad thing, has that ever been the best policy solution? I think very rarely. Connected to this appeal to fear, I think fundamentally, if you look at Donald Trump's speech, what actually terrifies me besides concerns over actual policy is that while he appeals to fear, it's very common, my opinion watching his entire speech was that more important is there was no appeal to the human intellect, human rationality, the human capacity for understanding reality. And that's sort of horrifying because you're giving a speech via televisions in an industrial society that is built by engineering. And you don't think it's important to talk about, the need to have people sit down and think and work through our problems like adults and not just panic. And the reason that terrifies me is not that it's just a bad policy idea. It's that it makes you wonder what you would actually do in practice, right? President Obama, for as many flaws, at least doesn't encourage people to shut off their brains, freak out, and look for immediate solutions. I think he goes a bit too far in the opposite direction of sort of always downplaying people's concerns. But on balance, I'm not sure that's nearly as big of a problem as never telling people they need to calm down and think. So the way I would sum that up is that isn't it kind of terrifying to think that the leader of the free world, as people like to say, the commander-in-chief of the United States military, doesn't appeal to place a very high concern on human rationality, right? Nothing in that speech would make you think this is a man who cares primarily about the intellectual faculty, and not in the ivory tower sense, but just in terms of, we have a problem, what should we go to? He doesn't think research, science, reason, philosophy. He thinks panic, fear, adrenaline. That's undesirable in general, in my opinion. And commander-in-chief is not the same as guy who's a little bit too angry that you're talking to at a bar. it's a little worse in that context. Thirdly, and connected through what I refer to as sense of life, I don't think anything in Donald Trump's speech was suggesting that self-improvement is valuable in life. And I think that's just sort of very bad for a speech by an American president. So what I mean is that if you look at his speech, and I would stress very strongly that for everything I'm saying here, listen to the speech if you didn't catch it the first time, or look at the transcripts. There's nothing particularly special about the delivery, in my opinion. And what you'll see is that nowhere in that speech, or very little, do you see a construction of Americanism or the American dream in terms of self-improvement, in terms of self-motivated action in life, or thinking, excluding these sort of big policy concerns, the idea that progress requires planning and thinking and considering our values and cooperation with other people who have value they can provide to us. It's a very, so at first, it's missing that. It's missing an actual vision of America in terms of optimism or pragmatism in the particular sense of, looking for the answers, looking for an understanding of our lives and how to improve them, how to improve quality of life. Not only is it missing that, it was also sort of a horribly cynical, doom and gloom, the sky is falling speech. And the problem is that in general, first, this is not an accurate description of the world. If you look at violent crime rates across the United States, they have gone up slightly this year, but they've been going down on average for, I believe, the past 30 years, but a very large time scale. I believe Clinton was in the White House the last time crime on a national scale was actually going up. The coverage has gone up quite a lot in many respects, but if you look at the actual crime rate, it appears to have been going down in general for the past 30 years. Terrorism, which is a legitimate problem, right? The sort of level of doom and gloom does not suggest, here is a coherent strategy that actually would lead to the addressing of terrorism, the destruction of ISIS. In fact, Donald Trump's only plan with respect to ISIS was, we're going to destroy them fast. Now, I think, without any military training of my own, that fast does not constitute a military philosophy. If I'm wrong, someone is free to correct me, of course, but fast is not a plan. It was actually the Iraq war plan in a certain respect, and that didn't go that great in many respects. The actual initial sort of overthrow of the Saddam Hussein regime worked, but since our plan was, we'll just fast, the afterwards was not ideal in many respects. But that was the only actual plan that Trump had, was fast, or strong, or tough, or America. Problem is that there's no problem in reality where a single word said very passionately is the solution. Terrorism is not a simple thing. Not even cooperating with our allies is a strategy. And although it's okay for leaders to give speeches that lack certain kinds of details and certain levels of details, the problem is that you need to at least suggest that you have a clear approach you take to issues, an actual systematic, mentally serious approach to problems that you take that develops the plan. So, for instance, we should have seen Trump developing that the belief that there are certain things that need focus in certain respects. For instance, maybe if someone thought that the main problem was lack of coordination of intelligence, they could mention that, give an example and an elaboration on a way they think it could be improved. And just working through their process would give an indication of whether or not we trust their general method. But in Trump's case, all he says is, we're going to be strong. It's just vacuous. Like, wrong isn't even quite the right description, because wrong implies that it's a plan that won't work. But it's not a plan, so we can't say it's a plan that won't work. Whew. So I like to sum it up this way, which is that if you look at the totality of Trump's speech, I think there's a fundamental lack of substance in most senses of the term, and completely throughout the entire content. There's no point in that speech where I thought, this is a substantial, thought-out idea, even if I disagree with it. We did not even hit that barometer, right? We did not hit the bare minimum of, I disagree, but I recognize that you are serious in your suggestions. At no point did I have that feeling. And look, you know, if I go back and watch the speech, we might find some little bits that I think were okay, but it's kind of like saying the opening credits in Transformers were pretty well done, so it's a good movie. That just not going to save it. And I'd sum up, besides the vacuousness, the emptiness, the even sub-anti-intellectualism of it, was that it was really missing from Trump's speech the idea or even the suggestion that life requires thinking, not necessarily highly abstract, you know, experimental thinking on seemingly, you know, ethereal topics of no relevance, but just the idea that in almost every sphere of human life, the reality is that thought is very important for good outcomes, or at least is a primary driver of improving the general outcome. And the terrifying thing to me was just that Trump never suggested to me a vision of either his leadership or his view of human life or America or civilization that included a focus on humans as rational beings. And that's very worrisome, because once you sort of have lost that sense that reason matters, there's a lot of things that are going to go with it. Decency, restraint, the idea that, you know, we need a plan. We can't just go be tough. The very base idea that you have to recognize that you have to have a decent footing to develop good plans. And it just terrifies me in that respect, that if he were actually elected, it does increase the notion that he somehow just succeeded by winging it his entire life, which is not a pleasant image of the leader of the country, just sort of winging it. So I think I might have deviated from my original plan a little bit there. I hope everyone's enjoyed the video. My name is Joshua Phillips. Channel's Living Reason. You can get us at facebook.com/livingreason. If you enjoyed the content, I would ask you to please share it with your friends, like, you know, all the normal social media stuff. I'd really appreciate the shares. Any feedback. I love feedback. I love hearing what people think. I do know I need a better setup, but beyond that, if you have specifics for a setup, I would definitely take that. Or just in general, you know, suggestions on how to approach topics, suggestions on specifics of what I've said here, for instance, I'd be glad to elaborate at long length. Just thank you for watching, everybody. I hope you have a good night. It's Joshua Phillips for Living Reason. Have a good day.